little more in front of me, maybe. Go over there. So that's perfect. So Baruch Hashem, we're going to move this over and we're going to start. It is New Year's Eve, and I see a lot of people not showing up, but it's okay. It doesn't make a difference. You know, the story of the Rebbe ever told, I think it was Jech's brother in Yechidus, was on New Year's night. So he said, a Happy New Year's. The Rebbe said, a little shocked. So he told him that it says in Tehillim, Hashem, I think it's from the B'ditcher for Hashem, Yisper Chsevam. Hashem counts by the numbers of the nations. So whatever. Anyway, let's begin, my dear friends. So you're holding chapter 6. Did you review it all? Chapter 6 is going to be a very interesting chapter, very important chapter, and we'll talk a lot about the principles of how taste is transferred. And that's going to be very, very important, because anytime you have a question you want to ask the rabbi, knowing what to ask, knowing what is a problem, what not a problem. I'm telling you why the rabbi will tell you something you were sure was forbidden, might be okay. The principles will be in this week's chapter. And then next week, chapter 7, we can talk about practical cases and mix-ups and stuff like that once you have the foundational rules down pat. So let's go to page 106 in our kosher book. The Gemara and all that, I'm not going to read inside. Should we read the Gemara? Well, the point is you have a Gemara in Chulin that tells us not only is non-kosher food non-kosher, but the pot that was used, hello Hadassah, how are you? The pot that was used to cook non-kosher or to cook meat should not be used to cook milk. This is a rule because we're going to discover soon that the taste is absorbed in the pot. Let's read it inside. Chapter 3, we learned. We're on page 106, okay? In chapter 3, we learned that cooking dairy in a meaty ben yomo pot, even if it's clean, infuses the milchik food with a fleshik taste absorbed into the pot's walls, thus violating the biblical prohibition against cooking basar b'chalav. The underlying principle is that halacha equates to taste imparted by food with the food itself. When taste is absorbed into the pot, it retains the same status as the original substance. In this case, the meat. The concept is known as tam ki'ikr. This is a very important concept to know. Tam ki'ikr, which means that even though the actual non-kosher item is no longer here, the very fact that it was here and it gave flavor, now the flavor is like the actual object is still here. Okay? It's called tam ki'ikr. I actually want to bring some pots from the kitchen and some stuff for show and tell just to make it clear. We talk about different pots, but we'll have to use our imagination. So remember this rule. Okay, that's a tam ki'ikr. The tam, the flavor of something, it's as if it's there. So let me just explain. Here. So he gives an example. Let's read below. Consider this application. A piece of steak falls into a pot of boiling hot milk. Okay, meat and milk, non kosher, right? What do? The second you see the meat fall into the milk, you take the meat out right away. You take it out a minute later, a second later, two seconds later. Now, what is the status of the milk? It's treif. Why? You took the meat out. Even though you took the meat out of the milk, which means there's no longer any meat and milk mixed together, because there was a moment when the meat was imparting flavor into the milk, all of this milk now has the status of a mixture of meat and milk mixed together, and all of it is non-kosher. And by the way, if you were to mix that milk into something else, then all of that would become treif, because all of the milk is now basar b'chalav. So therefore, even after the original substance has been removed from the mixture, it's still there. Okay. What happens if more than 24 hours have passed since the pot was used to cook meat? So now it's already a different conversation. I mean, before we go to number 3, understand? So if I put meat into the milk and take the meat out, what happens? It's treif. Why? Because the tam ki'ikr. So what happens? Let me give you another example now. You cook meat in the pot. You took the meat out of the pot, but the pot absorbed the flavor of the meat, and now you cook milk in that pot. Treif. Why? because the flavor of the meat is imparted into the milk, even though there was no milk being cooked together with meat. The meat was cooked at 10 o'clock. You wash the pot out afterwards. It's not even like there's pieces of meat still in the pot, because obviously the pieces, if it's dirty and you use the dirty pot, then obviously the flavor is being transferred. We're talking about you cooked it at 10 o'clock. You washed it. And now at 12 o'clock, 2 hours later, you're cooking milk in the same pot. Since there was flavor absorbed into the walls of the pot, therefore, it's treif. Got it? I said 12 o'clock. We're going to say till 24 hours. I just gave a 10 and 12 as a random example, but okay. Amen. Might not be hot. I added more water before. However, okay. So now we come to the next rule of what's called no saying tam lifgam, where flavor becomes stale. So if more than 24 hours have passed from when you cooked the meat in the pot, so let's say you cooked it at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday, and now on Tuesday at 12 o'clock, you want to cook milk in the pot. Even though there was meat flavor absorbed into the pot at 10 o'clock, guess what? Halacha assumes that after 24 hours, the residual taste in the pot's wall is now stale, and therefore the flavor that will be imparted is not a good flavor, but it's a bad flavor. And bad flavor does not make it not kosher anymore, and therefore it's tam lifgam. Same thing if you cooked non-kosher in a pot, and more than 24 hours have passed, again, where the pot is clean, it's been washed, it's a spotlessly clean pot. Biblically, you will be allowed to cook the kosher food in the non-kosher pot if 24 hours had passed. That's biblically. Why? Why? Because the flavor after 24 hours becomes stale and bad flavor, and that's called tam lifgam, a flavor which is negative. Doesn't impart and add good to the food, it makes bad. So therefore, it doesn't impact the kosher status of the food. However, even though on the biblical level, the non-kosher taste after 24 hours is considered tam lifgam, a negative taste, the rabbis came along and said that if we're going to allow you to cook in such pots, what's going to happen? Yeah, exactly. You're going to get used to cooking kosher and non-kosher pots, or cooking meat in dairy pots and whatever after 24 hours. And then one day you'll forget, or you won't know that your mother used a pot yesterday in the morning, and you'll think it's today in the morning, etc. And what's going to happen if there's no separation between meat pots and milk pots, or meat pots and non-kosher pots? And the next thing you know, mistakes are going to happen. People are going to be mixing up pots and not going to know when it was last used, and it's going to be dirty. And so therefore, the rabbi said, even after 24 hours, even though biblically the flavor is tam lifgam, it's a negative flavor, nevertheless, the rabbis ruled that the food is non-kosher even after 24 hours. Okay? And we're going to learn that there's davar charif. We learned about davar charif, and that's a sharp flavor, and that doesn't need to be in there. Even after 24 hours, it still is a biblically forbidden extraction of flavor. That's not relevant for right now. Okay, so now we come to a question. What's the question? The question is, under what conditions do we have a transfer of taste? Okay, so all we've established so far is tam ki iker. The flavor of the imparting of flavor is as if you're actually mixed the two items together, and that the walls of a pot can also hold and transfer flavor. Not only pot, the plate, the spoon, the knife, everything. Knife is different, whatever. So now we're going to learn about the transfer of flavor. In order for flavor to be transferred, two factors need to take place. You need the medium by which they transfer and the condition that allows for the transfer. Meaning, let's say I put my phone, I'm going to give you a simple example. If I put my phone next to your phone, does that mean the data on my phone goes to your phone? No. They have to be synced to each other, right? So you need to have my phone and your phone need to be connected, and there needs to be, both are Androids or whatever. Like, so if you have Apple Play or AirPlay, whatever it's called, AirDrop, AirShare, now I have an Android, it doesn't help, right? So it has to be. So you need to have the right conditions to allow for the transfer of flavor to happen, and that happens via medium. It happens by Bluetooth. It happens by, the Apple AirDrop or whatever it's called. It happens by Wi-Fi, and you need to have the conditions that allow it to happen. Okay. So, number one, the taste can only permeate a mixture when you have a medium that allows it to spread. Normally, that medium would be liquid. Okay. Alternatively, it could be fat. So even if you have something which is lean, it's not wet, but it's a piece of steak, for example. The steak is fat or oily. Oil, fat, these things, even though they're not liquidy, but they have the fat, the oil goes through, seeps through, and somehow everything will be, the flavor will be transferred through the fat or the oil into everything. However, just to be clear, so let's say you took two completely dry pieces and put them next to each other. Is there a transfer of flavor from one to the other? They're both dry. We're going to get to the heat, but generally speaking, no. And if they is, it's just because they clean, you just wash it. They're cold. Correct. Well, you have to, we wash it. Let's say you have kosher fish, touching non-kosher fish. You rinse it because it was touching, so whatever. But past that, you don't have to. Now, the second thing you need to have is a condition that allows a transfer, and that would be heat. Again, it could also be spicy, but we're not getting to that right now. Heat. Also salty, by the way, when something is salted, something is pickled, but generally speaking, the most common scenario is heat, and that's what we're going to talk about for today. Now, what's considered hot by Jewish law? It has to be hot enough to be yad soledesbo, which means that if you touch it, your hand would recoil from the touch. That's how hot it is. In temperatures, the general consensus is 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? Something which is 113 degrees is considered yad soledesbo. That's the temperature. But you can feel, if you would touch it and it would burn you, you right away, not that you actually get like a hot, like a burn, like you need to go to the doctor, but like it would burn you, you turn your hand away, that's considered yad soledesbo. By the way, it's also the laws of Shabbos too, by the way. Shabbos is the same thing. You can't cook on Shabbos. What's considered cooking? If you heat something up to be yad soledesbo, that's considered cooking. Okay, so that's what we're going to remember now. Next thing to remember is that the complete taste transfer happens when they're both hot, or at least the bottom one is hot, because if only one of them are hot, we go by what the bottom one is, because heat rises. So if the bottom piece is hot and the top piece is cold, what's going to happen to the top piece? It's going to get heated up by the bottom piece. So that will allow the transfer of flavor. And fine. Now taste, if it's the other way around though, let's say it's cold on cold, or the bottom is cold, then you have to remove kidei klipa. Then you have to remove only, we're going to get to kidei klipa soon. Okay.
I have a question about
Yeah.
that. Even if you have, it says in the textbook, like meat and cheese that are cold when they touch, biblically, it's okay.
Say again, repeat your question.
You have a cold piece of meat and a
Cold-
cold piece of like cheese, and you put them together and they touch. Biblically, it's okay if you
Yeah.
separate them and eat.
There's no transfer of flavor.
Biblically.
Biblically, if I'll repeat the question, if you put a cold piece of cheese on a cold piece of meat, let's say they're both kosher, and now they were touching meat and milk, took them apart. Biblically, no flavor was transferred between them. They're no longer, you're not eating them together anymore. And there's no tam ki ikar, only means that the flavor of the cheese was transferred into the meat. But cold meat and cold, which is not fatty, it's not what I'm saying, it's cold. Which is why, and cold milk, cold, not milk, not liquid. I'm talking about a solid. A liquid would get into it, obviously.
Yeah.
A piece of cheese, yeah. We would rinse them, called hadacha, and you'd be allowed to eat it.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The rinsing is only like an extra astringency. Biblically, as long as there's nothing, no crumbs or whatever of the cheese stayed on the meat, or vice versa, then we'll be allowed.
Would you, if you had a piece of cheese and meat that were cold and they touched, would you wash it off and still eat it?
Yeah. That's all you need to do. That's why you don't need two fridges.
Yeah.
You don't need a meat fridge and a milk fridge, because even if you're in the fridge, things touch in fridges.
Yeah.
Fridges are crowded. And normally you don't have meat sitting open. Usually it's like in a Ziploc bag or in a tray, whatever. But theoretically, most, and your milk also, your cheese is in a bag. It's in a container. It's not sitting open. But theoretically, they're all in the same fridge. And theoretically, it could happen that the meat, it could happen. again, you don't usually have open meat sitting, open chicken. Like you don't put a piece of chicken in the fridge. Like, you know what I'm saying? The chicken's in the tray. It's inside but still, you don't need it. You don't need to separate in your fridge between meat and milk because it's cold. So there's no transfer. Obviously, if cold milk spilled onto the meat and the milk went in, like then obviously it's liquid. We're talking about the transfer of yeah. Okay. Now, in addition to heat, another way that you have a transfer of flavor is when we call pickled, which is basically when it soaks for 24 hours uninterrupted. So if let's say you put cold milk, let's say you put meat into the milk, cold, okay? And the meat sat there for 24 hours, let's just say. And now you took it out. It was all cold the whole time, sitting in the fridge. Then you can't wash it off. You can't wash it off because even though there was never a transfer with heat, the fact that the meat sat there, and the same thing with the milk, the fact that the milk had meat sitting in there for 24 hours, and there was no heat, but it was sitting more than 24 hours, that's considered like a pickling process. In Hebrew, it's called kavush k'mevushel. It's not written here in the text, but it's fine. Kavush k'mevushel. And that would also be considered a transfer of flavor and be forbidden. Okay. But yes, if you had a piece of cold meat fall into cold milk, you can eat the milk afterwards. You know what I'm saying? Take it out. It'll be okay.
If meat falls in the milk?
Lots of cold. Everything is cold. Okay. Now, beyond that, we're also going to talk about what kind of vessel it was in, what kind of pot it was in. Because in order for we're talking about you need to have heat, right? In order for the transfer of flavor to happen, there needs to be heat, correct? The heat is what makes it transfer. So, ideally, in the perfect situation, or a terrible situation, if you want to say, in biblical halacha, the minimum requirement, in order to have heat, where do you have heat? In a kli rishon. What's a kli rishon? Remember these words. You're going to need to know this not only for the laws of kosher, but again also for the laws of Shabbos. Kli rishon means the pot on which the food is cooking, or in which the food is cooking. So imagine that's the urn that's plugged into the, it's making noise, and now we added more water to the urn. That hot water urn is kli rishon. That is the pot in which it cooks. So ideally, meaning in a perfect example, a textbook example, not to be the right word, in the textbook scenario, where do you have a transfer of flavor? Within that kli rishon. And that could be whether or not the kli rishon is on the fire, or even if you took it off the fire, but it's still the original walls of the kli rishon, they still have that intensity and that heat of the kli rishon. Okay? However, when you take the vessel, the food, out of the kli rishon, and you put it into a kli sheni, I wanted to take like some pots in the kitchen, so you have like this would be the first pot, this would be the second pot, but just visualize this. You have the pot on the fire, and now you put the food into the second pot. The walls of the second pot cool off the food because those walls are cold. The food in the first pot, not only the food get heated, the walls of the pot got heated, so they're increasing the heat inside the pot. The heat inside is from the walls. And therefore, a kli sheni, biblically, meaning like technically, not rabbinic rulings later on, does not have cooking inside a kli sheni. Okay? So there's no cooking in the kli sheni. This is, again, by the extreme letter of the law. We're going to be more strict, and I'll explain that in a second, but it's important, again, we're teaching the halacha, you should understand the full picture. Marsha's not here tonight. She get nervous with me. I'm telling you things but by law, min hadin, that's the din. That's the law. So, at this point, again, we're going to be more strict than me. I'm going to tell you how we rule today. But just understand, let's say you see the two terms, kli rishon, there's a primary vessel, even if it's off the fire, and then you have the secondary vessel. So let's say you have pork that falls into a pot of hot beef stew cooking on the stovetop. That's the direct example of kli rishon, right? Pot's on the fire, everything is not kosher. The food is not kosher. Not only is the food not kosher, the pot that had this kosher chicken soup, that now got a piece of pork put into the kosher chicken soup, Now the entire liquid, all of the chicken soup is considered treif. Again, assuming there's enough non-kosher meat, because it's a very small amount. It's not if I 1 in 60, but let's leave that for when we get to that class. For right now, there's enough pork goes into the chicken soup. Even though you took out the pork right away, it was a big piece of pork. All of the chicken soup is treif, and because all the chicken soup is treif from the original piece of meat, tam ki'ikr, so the walls of the pot are also treif. The whole pot has to be kosher. Okay. But however, let's say you took chicken soup out of the pot and you put chicken soup into your bowl. Now you sit down by the table to eat your chicken soup. So chicken soup's already in the bowl, which is a klisheni. It's already been cooled off. And the cold bowl cooled off a little bit of the intensity of the soup that you put into or the stew, whatever you put into your bowl. And now the pork fell into the stew in your bowl. You take it out right away. Do we say tam ki'ikr over here? And do we assume that all of the food in your bowl is treif, even after you took it out? Obviously, the part of touch you take it out, obviously, as well. But is the rest of the food in your bowl, is all of that also considered treif or not?
The pork chop
fell into the klisheni. You on your plate. Okay? So you have your plate of food in front of you.
Yeah.
And now someone came by and they touched one part of the food with their pork. And it was a hot pork, even if it was cold pork, it make a difference because the plate was on the bottom is hot. But it was a klisheni, not kli rishon. So, by technical law, there's no cooking in the klisheni. However, the rabbis came along and we said that there is cooking in the klisheni, especially if it's a gush, if it's like a hot thing. And therefore, the rabbi said that all of the food will be treif, even in the klisheni. Even in the klisheni. However, because it's already a next level requirement, there would be cases, not lechatchila, not ideally, but b'di'evid, if something happened, if you can't do that on purpose, but if let's say you're a caterer and all of a sudden somehow non-kosher food touched one part of the food, obviously you remove that part, but to say the entire pot is not kosher, there'll be room to be lenient because it's already a secondary requirement as a cliche and not a kli rishon. You follow the difference? Okay. And you can see here in your books of examples, some pictures of this. Now, I want to just explain something. We on Shabbos rule that kli sheni cooks. That's our ruling. Meaning we don't accept what I'm telling you now, I'm reading what from the book says. That's not how we practically. Everything is the same, by the way. Meaning the rules of Shabbos are the same rules as the rules of kosher. Either by halacha, something is considered cooking, or it's not considered cooking. So I want to clarify something very important. I'm sure you both know this. When you make tea on Shabbos, you make coffee on Shabbos. How do you make the tea on Shabbos? Kli shlishi, exactly right. What is kli shlishi?
From the original pot into this pot and then from this pot.
Exactly right. So the pot, the urn is a kli rishon. You pour from the pot into the first cup, but you don't put the tea bag into that cup. Why? Because that's klisheni. So even though we just read that klisheni is not considered cooking, that's the technical, but that's not the ruling. Shulchan Aruch says we have to be more careful, and so that's we don't accept this in halacha today, and we say that even the klisheni is considered cooking, and that's why you'd have to pour the water into a kli shlishi, into a third vessel, which is cup number 2, because the pot was number 1, before you put a tea bag in and cook the tea, not leaves, whatever, the ground up leaves or the instant coffee, whatever. Whether not cooking coffee, instant coffee is considered cooking is a whole discussion, but whatever. You understand? So the same thing with the non-kosher. If non-kosher food touched food in the klisheni, again, unless there's a very special circumstance, you're talking about a huge pot for 100 people and you're catering an event, otherwise the halacha would be klisheni is considered cooking. Now, let me give you another more practical example now. So let's say you have a klisheni. You made coffee, not Shabbos, okay? So you made coffee with milk in the klisheni. And now you put a fleshik, that's a meat spoon, into mix the coffee. Pretty practical example, right? You weren't paying attention, you took a spoon, you didn't realize it was a meat spoon. has to be ben yomo, because again, if it's not ben yomo, again, this is what ben yomo, meaning it's within 24 hours. So the meat spoon was used within the last 24 hours. Because again, if it's after 24 hours, again, although ideally you can do it after the fact, rinse the spoon, whatever. It's not like we would kosher. I shouldn't say that. We would kosher it, but by law. So you mix this ben yomo spoon into the hot coffee that has milk in the coffee, in the klisheni. What will be the halacha? So by the law, if there's no cooking in the klisheni, if there's no cooking by law, then the cup is kosher. The coffee, is kosher. Even though the spoon would be treif. Why would the spoon be treif? And the spoon absorbed milk and meat within the same 24-hour period. So the spoon is treif. Have to be kosher. But the coffee, after 24 hours, but the coffee itself is in a klisheni. So the fact that there's a non-kosher spoon or a meat spoon put in, technically would be okay. We don't rule that way. We say it has to be a klishlishi.
Yeah, that's.
But I'll tell you the halach. Now, what would happen if it's a klishlishi? What would happen with the Shabbos? So normally you wouldn't make a klishlishi when you make your coffee. But let's say you made your coffee on Shabbos morning. So you made your coffee on Shabbos morning, and now you put the coffee into the second cup, the water to the second cup, and then the second cup to the third cup, and then you put in your coffee, and now you mixed the coffee with a non-kosher spoon. The coffee is kosher. Coffee is kosher because there's no cooking in the klishlishi. There's no cooking. The spoon, though, absorbed milk and meat. The spoon has a problem. Understand? Now, by the way, why is this important to know? Why am I making you crazy about what's the halach if we like the technical law if we don't rule that way? You want to know what I'm telling you? You ready for this? You ready to get your mind blown? And why halach is so brilliant, so complicated? Let's go back to the cliche in the example. So you made the coffee straight from the urn, not in the klishlishi. You have the milk in there. You put in your meat ben yomo spoon that was used within the last 24 hours. Clean, but used within the last 24 hours. The coffee, we're saying, is not kosher because we're saying that there is considered cooking in the klisheni, even though not really. And the spoon is not kosher, for sure, both. But what about the mug? The mug, the coffee cup. The mug was a klisheni. The walls of the mug are not hot. The wall's not hot. We take a mug. The outside, you can hold a mug by the outside. It gets hot eventually over time. It's not, the wall's not hot. And the idea that we say that cooking happens in the food as long as it's yad soledes is for the food. To say that it's so not kosher that it would make the mug didn't touch the meat spoon. You know what I'm saying? It was liquid. The liquid became mixed with meat and milk. The mug would not be not kosher. The mug would be fine. Understand? That's what's important to understand these differences in halacha, even though it's complicated. And the simple way to do it, say, cliche, you mix the meat spoon into a cup of coffee, it's all tray, throw it all out. But that's not true. The cup, even though you understand, some people won't understand this, they get blown away. You're saying in the same mixing the spoon in the coffee, the spoon is not kosher and the cup is kosher. Yeah.
So could you just dump out that coffee, clean up the cup?
Rinse out the cup with cold water, make another cup. Making a cup of coffee.
Even though it's klishishi?
What do you mean klishishi? You're talking about no. If the mug's a klishishi, for sure it's fine. And even the coffee is fine. The same way you're allowed to cook, so to say on Shabbos, a tea bag on Shabbos, because halachically it's not considered cooking. So halachically, the klishishi is not considered cooking. Okay. Now, by the way, I don't get too distracted on the laws of cooking on Shabbos, but people should realize, let's say when you are cooking so in general, davar gush, so many different things. But if some people rule that as long by liquid, we only say there's no cooking in the klishlishi. With solids, there's always cooking. The food, again, not the plate. But some rabbis rule that with food, as long as it's too hot to touch, it can still cook by a solid, not by a liquid. which would make issues with like putting salt into your cholent on Shabbos, or putting it into chicken soup. The whole thing of is the bowl a kli sheni or a kli shlishi? I'll give you an example. I just want to blow you for 1 second.
One bowl into another?
Let's say when you take chicken soup into your bowl,
Yeah.
how did the chicken soup get into your bowl?
With a spoon.
The ladle. So maybe you can make the argument that the chicken soup in the pot is kli rishon, the ladle is kli sheni, and your soup is kli shlishi.
I see that.
Oh, you didn't think of the ladle. You just have the pot and the bowl. But when you put the ladle into the kli rishon, does it lose it and it's completely submerged in the kli rishon? Can you still say it's a kli sheni? Or now that it's completely submerged, all of the walls of the ladle became hot, and therefore it has the same heat as the kli rishon. Unlike your bowl, the outside of your bowl remains cold. You understand? So it's machlekes. I just want to blow your mind a little bit to give you an idea how. So with soup, if you say there's cooking, we rule you're cooking on kli sheni. So you're not allowed to put salt into your soup on Shabbos because you're cooking the soup, you're cooking the salt on Shabbos. So some people will tell you that it's not considered cooking because it's a ladle, so it's really a kli shlishi. But some will tell you that's not kli shlishi because the ladle was inside the pot of soup, so it lost its kli sheni status. The moment it was completely submerged in the kli rishon, it's lost its status. Which is why I wouldn't put salt into my soup on Shabbos. There's a trick. How do you put soup? So what do you do if it's Shabbos and you want to put salt into your soup?
Grab it.
When you grab it.
I'm just guessing. I don't put salt in my food anymore.
Well, let's say it's really bland soup. What? You suppose you need it. So you take the spoon and lift the soup out of the kli sheni, and then put the salt into the spoon. The soup on the spoon.
People do that, and then you mix it.
And then you mix it.
Oh my god!
You saw people do that?
Happen like crazy.
That's the way to do it. Yeah.
Oh, there's no salt here. I would always see the shluchim take the salt, pour it on a spoon,
and then put it in. Exactly.
I never understood it. Now I
Understand?
Yeah.
So by putting the food onto the spoon, now the food is in a kli shlishi, and in the kli shlishi you can cook. It's not cooking. It's not. And then you can put the salt into the kli shlishi, and then you can put it back into the soup, into the chalk or whatever. Just like making coffee. The difference is we make coffee, putting from one cup to the next cup. Here we're trying to do with the food on your plate. You're not. Well, theoretically, you could take the whole challah, put the challah in another plate. You could do that. Or the soup, like you sit by someone's house, right? They serve you the soup on the table. You don't have another bowl. Like, excuse me, let me get another bowl and start pouring the soup from one bowl to the next bowl at the Shabbos table. It's not going to work. Understand? Okay. So going back to what we're saying, so even though you put in the spoon into the soup, but it's not nearly as hot. So the point is that the walls of the mug of the kli sheni, even though the food, we rule today, the halacha today, is that the food, even the kli sheni, is still considered cooking. It's not cooking enough to make the second kli sheni itself treif. Got it? Okay. Okay. Now, here we come to the next situation. You ready for the next situation? In between kli rishon, which is the first pot in which it cooked in, and kli sheni, which is the second pot. Let's say here. Here's the pot cooked in. Here's kli sheni. There's an in middle state. You know what the middle state is called? Well, no, I'm saying in between. There's everything is like iroi kli rishon. Iroi kli rishon means when you pour from the kli rishon, so it's no longer in the kli rishon, but it's not yet in the cold walls of a kli sheni. So what happens when you're pouring the hot food out of the pot onto something else?
It's cooling down.
It's cooling as you're pouring it. It's cooling down, but it hasn't yet landed in a cold kli sheni yet. So the halacha is that when you're pouring it onto another food, either kli rishon, it only infuses taste to the outermost layer of the food that it touches, which is called kedei klipa, which means you have to remove, like you take a knife or something and remove like a thin layer of the food on top of it.
So if you take chon from
Klisheni.
Klisheni, and you need to take a knife and clean off the top.
So, say your question again.
If I take cholent from clear Rishon,
Take it out of the cholent pot.
yeah, and
You put it into a plate.
yeah,
Now what?
I need to take a knife and.
No, that's only a mixture of flavors.
Oh.
I'm talking about Shabbos. I'm talking about the Iroi.
Okay.
I'll give you an example for Shabbos. Where do you know the Iroi Klirushin is a problem? Let's say, you know what we do today when it's cliche, it's a klishlishi. You're not supposed to put the coffee into the klishlishi before you put the water in. Even if you do, it's good. Ideally, what are you supposed to do? You first put the water into the klishlishi, and then after the water's in the klishlishi, then you put the coffee in. Why? What would be the problem if you put in the coffee first? As you're pouring the water in to the klishlishi, at that point, it's an iroi of a klisheni. It's a pouring of a klisheni. So it would cook the coffee even before it hit the tea bag. It would pour over the tea bag even before it hit the walls of the klishlishi, which is why you should first put the water on Shabbos into a klishlishi, and only then put in the tea bag. Only then put in the coffee. Understand? So too over here you have one. It's in a klishlishi or a klisheni, whatever. It's not considered cooking anymore. But the iroi can cook. The pouring can cook kidei klipa for the level of appeal. Got it? So you have the kli rishon where it cooks completely. The pouring which cooks kidei klipa a little bit or whatever it touched. And then the klisheni where it doesn't cook. We are more strict. So we say even the klisheni cooks. And then you have the pouring of the klisheni to be kidei klipa. And then the klishlishi where it doesn't cook. Got it? Got it. Okay. Now, are you ready for another complicated question? So, and here you see, by the way, before that, on 116, you have each of these three examples, each of these three levels in the graph on 116. You have the Kli Rishon itself, which is a pot on the fire, but it's the same thing even if you took it off the fire. The picture should show both, really, if you ask me, and then make it. So you have the rest of them, which was originally cooked, and then that's complete infusion of flavor into the entirety of all of the food. Even if it's only, it's a big pot, whatever, get into the mouth. You have the pouring of the Kli Rishon, which is only a taste into the outermost shell or the peel, so to say, of the food. And you have the klisheni, which typically affects a complete taste. As we explained, we rule that it makes a complete taste transfer, but in cases of a loss or regarding the actual pot itself, etc., where it would be allowed in the klisheni. Okay. So, now let's talk about something very, very interesting, which is where do we have either Kli Rishon is a big problem in the kitchen where you have only one sink, is the sink faucets. Sink faucets are one of the worst parts of a kitchen. In general, when you're cashmere for Pesach, sink faucet is a problem. My house for Pesach, I have Pesach faucets. I unscrew the whole thing, put a different faucet for Pesach, because the kasher faucet is very hard. What was the problem with the faucet? When you open the hot water on your faucet, the water is coming from the hot water boiler in your garage, through the pipes, out of the faucet. Now, when it comes out of the faucet, well, that's all considered irei Kli Rishon. Even though the faucet is from the hot water, the boiler is, 100 feet away, whatever it is, a whole journey to go through pipes under the thing. But because it's a continuous flow, doesn't matter how high up the pot is. Irei Kli Rishon is whether I'm pouring from here to here, pouring from here, doesn't make a difference. As long as it's a continuous flow, so there's an irei from the boiler all the way to your sink. So when the water comes out of the sink, what's happening? It's making an irei Kli Rishon, which means that any food inside the sink at that time that the hot water comes upon it is now becoming cooked. Kidei klipa, the shell, the outer layer of it, but it's being cooked. So what happens if you have meat and milk in your sink? Not that you're eating it. It's dirty dishes. No one cooks in their sink. But what happens, it's the sink. You only have one sink. So you put the meat dishes there. And now someone put a coffee mug in there. and then you turn on the faucet, and the hot water goes, and the water that was in the faucet, in the sink, in the cup, the milk in the cup spills over, and now it touches the meat. There you go. That's basar b'chalav. Everything is treif now. Your pot and the milk and the cup and everything became treif. Not only that, the walls of your sink became treif. Because the walls of your sink absorbed a mixture of direct from the pore of a kli rishon of meat and milk. Which is why you need to be very, very careful. We're going to get to the chapter when we talk about the actual kitchen, how to keep a kosher sink if you only have one sink. We'll talk about it. But the point is that the iroi can cause direct transfer between the plates and the sink surface and everything inside because you have dirty food of meat and milk and all that. Even ben yomo. Not only that, by the way, not only you have dirty food at the same time, it's ben yomo. Let's say you wash it's with the water. Let's say you wash meat dishes in there. Okay, it's ben yomo now. Now 2 hours later you wash the milk in there and you left it sitting in there and there was water was sitting on the walls of the sink and the walls of the sink absorbed the meat. It's straight. Okay, so that's where irreclusion is a very, very practical, important thing to know. Okay. Anyway, we went kind of quick because there wasn't a lot of questions or challenges. That's great. So I have a chance to give you a beautiful spiritual message and spiritual lesson from this idea of tam, of flavor being transferred only when it's fresh, when it's ben yoma. What's a beautiful spiritual lesson for us? In order for us to impart our flavor of our Yiddishkeit, to impart the beauty and the vitality and the energy of holiness, we need to be what's called in Hebrew ben yomo, fresh flavor. If your Judaism is stale, because 2 weeks, last week I learned something, but I didn't learn anything today. If you didn't learn Torah today, if you didn't daven to Hashem today, if you didn't spiritually connect yourself today, and you're lying, in fact, you learned last week, or you went to shul last week, and you prayed last week, guess what? Your Judaism has become old. It's last week's news. It's yesterday's news. Yesterday's learning is not going to be fresh enough to impart flavor onto your environment around you today. Beautiful, beautiful lesson. If you want to be an influence, if you want to be able to impart your flavor onto somebody else, your own internal flavor needs to be ben yoma, needs to be fresh, needs to be something I learned today, and that's why I'm excited about it. It's hard to be excited about what you learned last week, but something that's whatever. So that's a very beautiful lesson for us. Okay, and now let's do a test. You ready? So let's do the assessment. Page 120. Let's ask some questions and let's see how will you absorb what is actually quite a complicated chapter.
I like this one a lot.
Yeah, because it's the rule. This is the rules. This is the principles. Next week, we'll go into some of the practical cases. And everyone that missed today, hopefully they'll watch the video because if I'm going to start saying things next week and they don't know about Ben Yomo and this and that, they're going to all be blown away. They're going to have explosions going on in their brain. If a pot was used 48 hours ago to cook non-kosher, and it has since been thoroughly cleaned, may one cook kosher, non-sharp food in it? What do you say? Yes, because it's ben yomo. Yes, it's not ben yomo. No, but if you did so accidentally, the food is kosher. No, and if one did so, the food is not kosher.
Biblically,
I won't say the answer, so I see. Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say C either.
You would have said C. What would you have said?
I mean, if it's after 24 hours, it's okay, isn't it?
That's what C is.
Oh,
That no, you are not allowed to cook not kosher food in the pot that was used to cook non-kosher 48 hours ago. However, if after the fact you did again, but it's not the way lechatchila, meaning ideally a Jew shouldn't do this.
yeah, that's what I was
And
thinking.
ideally, if you did it as almost, you shouldn't eat it. Ideally, but technically, by law, is the food non-kosher? By halacha, by ikar hadin? No. Although I'm not sure if I would agree with C.
That's what I was thinking too. I don't really agree with C. I don't agree with it. I think
The rabbi said you can't do it, so I'm not sure if that's the correct halacha. I'm gonna ask about this.
I was yeah.
I would say D. The more I think about it, the food is, I would not eat food that was cooked in non. I would, if someone called me and said, "Rabbi, I cooked food in the pot that was used for non-kosher last week and it was clean," I would say it's non-kosher pot. It's not kosher, but maybe. I'll tell you why the answer is C though, because it's talking about b'di'evet. Let me explain to you the difference between no. There's a difference between the chatchila and b'diavad. The chatchila means, if you come and say, Rabbi, can I cook kosher food in a pot that was used 48 hours ago? The answer would be, no, you're not allowed to. B'diavad means an accident happened. An accident happened. It's after the fact. Because it happened accidentally, that's what we call b'diavad, meaning the question is being asked, I think in English it's called post facto, after it already happened. Technically, did any transfer of good kosher, non-kosher taste happen? No. The rabbi said not to do it to prevent you from making mistakes. But in this case, if you can verify that it's not ben yomo, then after the fact, b'diavad, we would say that it's kosher. And that's why the correct answer is actually C. More I'm thinking about it, yes, C is the correct answer because it's the language is differentiating between no, you can't, but accidentally meaning b'diavad after the fact, yes, it's kosher. One cooked chicken soup in the pot over the fire, then removed the pot, and he placed it on the counter. Soup is still boiling. The soup inside this pot is kli rishon, irei kli rishon, kli sheni, noisin tam lefgam. Which one? Kli rishon. Even though it's off the fire, as long as the walls of that kli rishon maintain that level of heat, and it's still kli rishon. Now, what about if a beef stew is cooked in a pot over the fire and then poured into a bowl? If one then adds a piece of cheese to that bowl, which of the following statements is accurate? Number one, do we say that a complete taste transfer occurred between the meat, soup, and the cheese? Do we say 50% occurred between the meat and the cheese? According to all, no taste transfers, and therefore you may eat the beef and cheese because it's already poured into a kli sheni. Or do we say, since this case involves a kli sheni, in such a law the case is disputed? What's the halacha? Kli sheni. Let me make it more simple. Kli sheni. And now you put cheese into that kli sheni. Kli sheni. You have meat on the plate. And you put cheese into that beef stew. No, we rule. I told you, as far as we're concerned today, we paskin that kli sheni is cooking of the food. Not that it's okay. It's considered cooking. Today, halacha determines that a kli sheni is cooking. That's why you can't make tea in a kli sheni on Shabbos. And that's why if you mixed milk into a meat, cheese into milk, cheese into meat in the kli sheni, the food would be 100% not allowed. We would say that a complete taste transfer occurred between the meat and the cheese, even though it was a kli sheni. The fact that there's a discussion about the case only makes for in b'diavad cases to allow it to be lenient. If it's a big pot and a big, it's a catering event with 100 people at the wedding and you don't know what to do. That's where you're lenient.
You think it's A?
Yeah.
The book doesn't agree with you.
Two. The book says D.
They think it's D. I agree with you also. I don't think that's because we follow cliche. They in the book they don't really do that.
Okay, that's not the way we rule. So I don't know why he's bringing the case as disputed. It's okay. A stream of hot liquid poured from a kli rishon onto other food. When you have a stream, so it's an iroi of the kli rishon going on to other food, it causes a complete taste transfer, no taste transfer, a taste transfer up to the depth of a kedei klipa, a 25% taste transfer. Which one is it? No complete transfer, no transfer of taste, 25%, or just the level of a peel, of a shell, of a peel? Which one?
Because then you can take off from
the kedei klipa. The answer is that when you pour from the pouring makes it cook kedei klipa, the amount of cooking of a shell. Okay, I'm actually going to reach out to the author of this book because I have some issues with the leniency the way it's being presented. Okay, that, my friends, is chapter 6. B'ezrat Hashem, next week we'll get to some of the practical mix-ups and mishaps of that could happen. Good night. May you all be blessed with a wonderful evening. As the Rebbe said, a Happy New Year's and good things.